Hello everyone. In today's video we will be discussing about the Global Internal Audit Standard, which will be enacted from 2025. However, we will be just having a quick snapshot of what is the difference between the previous one and the new one, and some more information on the exam structure or when the new standards will apply uh, to the CIA exams, and some other deadlines or timelines related to the enactment of the Global Internal Audit Standards. This is a brief introduction of my career trajectory and my qualification, just to remind you that there are complete video series on part 1, part 2, and almost 70% of the syllabus I have covered in the part 3 videos available on my YouTube channel, currently which you are watching, by the name of Stuployer. The old internal audit standards were known as IPPF, which was released in 2017. And for this year 2024 it is still in use, so if you are practicing as an internal auditor you can still refer back to the old standard 2024. However, the new Global Internal Audit Standards is released on January 9, 2024 this year, and the effective date is next year, which is January 9, 2025. Here in this slide we will have a quick comparison of what has been changed from the previous one and what is there in the new one. I'm sure a lot of auditors are more familiar with the old version. The new version, I must say that it's much more organized, clean, and structured. Even when I was having comprehension over the previous old internal audit standards, I found it quite difficult for new internal audit practitioner to comprehend on the structure and the way the standards were being organized. So in the old one, mainly it was divided into two sections: mandatory guidance and the recommended guidance. And within the mandatory guidance we had the core principle, definitions, standards, and code of ethics. However, in the recommended guidance we had implementation guidance and supplemented guidance. However, the new structure is more clean, and it comprises of 5 domains. The first domain is purpose of internal auditing. The second one is ethic, professionalism. The third one is governance, and the fourth one is managing the internal audit function, and the fifth one is performing the internal audit activities or internal audit task. These 5 domains, basically, if you look into it, is basically covers the life cycle of the internal audit activities, from the very top, the purpose, the governance structure, to the performing and communicating. So this is a very holistically covers the whole life cycle of internal audit. However, previously the standards look a little bit distorted. We will look into more details in the next slide. So if you remember, in the old standards we had the mission, which overall governed the mandatory guidance and the recommended guidance. So the mission of the internal audit function, as well as in mandatory guidance and the recommended guidance. However, in the new standards we have a Global Internal Audit Standards. We have a mandatory guidance along with the topical requirements, and then we have a recommended guidance. So if I would like to map, is that mandatory guidance basically falls under Global Internal Audit Standards, and then there is a new requirement, we call it topical requirements, which means that we want to address specific emerging internal audit related areas or subjects with detailed guidance on it, that what are the things that internal auditor has to follow. For example, cybersecurity. For example, how internal audit the let's say artificial intelligence. what should be the role and how internal audit can audit the ESG. So these are topical requirements which emerge time to time, and what the governing body has done, that they wanted the internal auditor to have readily available requirements that they have to fulfill as a mandatory for specific topics, rather than waiting for the governing body to release the new draft proposal for the standards, and then there is a whole governing activity in terms of its taking the views, proposal drafts, and then making the finalization. So rather than waiting for such a long procedures, what they did is that for specific topics, they would come up, based on the advisory committee, they would come up with the specific requirements that the internal auditor has to fulfill, or will also give them a guideline that how they have to perform their auditing engagements for those specific areas. We still have a recommended guidance. Basically, this give more clarity that how the internal audit standards could be applied in certain specific situations. So more or less is the same, but it's much more structured, and which we will see in the coming slides. But one thing before that, if you remember in the previous one, the internal audit standards were divided into two sections: the attribute standards and the performance standards, which means there were a few critical characteristics of internal auditors that one needs to be aware of, and then there were specific standards related to performance. So these things have been taken away and it has been merged, so there is no more attribute and performance. And the second thing which I have observed is that there used to be a specific way of how the internal audit standard can be applied in auditing or in consulting engagement. So that also has been a bit blurred out in the new standards. So this is the new IPPF, basically which has multiple components: the standards, topical requirement, and the guidance. And the new standards comprises of 5 domains, certain principles, and then multiple standards within those principles. Topical requirement, as I have mentioned you before, is basically to address emerging areas or of concerns that will help the internal auditor to have something specific to refer back to while doing their internal audit activities. The guidance provide more elaboration to the standards in specific circumstances. So this is a graphical presentation of the things that which we already discussed. This is the most important slide in the whole presentation. Even if you skip the other ones, I would recommend if you can just focus on this one. Basically, this is the summary sheet kind of a thing for the Global Internal Audit Standards. The Global Internal Audit Standards is comprises of 5 domains, which you can see: the purpose, ethics, governance, managing the audit function, and performing the internal audit function. Within each domain, there are multiple principles, and these principles are 15 in total, and they are divided among different domains. And within each principle, then they have stipulated the standards. So there are total 5 domains. Within 5 domains, there are 15 principles, and within those 15 principles, there are 52 standards. That's how they have structured the IIA have structured the internal audit standards. The first domain is about the purpose of internal audit. The second one is about the ethics and professionalism. The third one is governing the internal audit function, and it has 3 principles. The previous one, the ethics and professionalism, has 5 principles, and the governing has 3 principles. Managing the internal audit function has 4 principles, and the 5th one, performing the internal audit services, has 3 principles. If you look into it, that the 1st till 5th, at the end of each point, I've mentioned certain abbreviations. So the first one, purpose of internal auditor, all these, all the standards is applicable to all internal auditors. So basically, they provided kind of a navigation based on that which area of the standard is more applicable to whom within the internal audit department or outside the department, within the organization. So the first one, purpose of internal audit, is applied to all auditors. Ethics and professionalism, which comprises of five principles, applies again to all internal auditors, that everyone has to comply with the ethics and professionalism. And the third one, governing the internal audit function, basically, which comprises of three principles, is matters related to the board, audit committee, and the chief audit executives. So if you are the head of the department, this is the area which might be more concerning to you, rather than it might have no much of a concern to a staff auditors or senior auditors, those who are not heading the internal audit department. Then the fourth one, managing the internal audit function, provide much more roadmap to chief audit executives, that how they have to manage the internal audit functions in terms of resource and other things. The fifth one, performing the internal audit services, again this is about very operational level, that how you plan your audit engagement, carry out your field work, and do the sampling, information gathering, reporting. This all comprises in the fifth one, and it again applies to all internal auditor. So it's a very nicely structured internal audit standard, which provide a good navigation for the internal auditors based on their seniority or based on their role within the internal audit department, to focus on which area of the standard might be more important for them as part of their internal audit activities. So the domain one basically set the foundation for the internal auditor in terms of what is the purpose of internal audit. One of the brief elaboration would be, internal audit enhances the organization's success by providing the board and the management with objective assurance and advice. So more or less is the same thing which we have in the previous standards, and it is more in reflect or mirror the internal audit definition. But here it set the key foundation for all the internal auditors at all level within the organization to understand the role of internal audit and the key purpose of the internal audit. So this domain just emphasized that thing, and it has some more explanation within that scope. The second domain is about ethics and professionalism. It's the same key elements that were before in the previous one, but now previously the code of ethics were separate out of the standard element, but now it is being integrated within the standards. So the second domain is about that all internal auditor has to demonstrate integrity, maintain objectivity, demonstrate competency, exercise due professional care, and maintain confidentiality. So this standard is all about the ethical values or parameters that internal auditor has to observe while performing the internal audit activities. Domain 3, governing the internal audit function, has three principles, and this domain basically addresses the issues related to the chief audit executive, his relationship with the board and audit committee, and the role of the board and the audit committee in terms of the governing the internal audit function within the organization. The three principles are which covers the key scope area of this domain is the authorization by the board, positioning of the internal audit department, and overseeing of the internal audit activities by the board. So these are the three areas which has substandards within each principles that basically cover the key scope of the internal audit function. The domain 4, which is about managing the internal audit function, again addresses the key requirements or the key elements that a chief audit executive or head of the internal audit has to take into consideration. It talks about, the first principle talks about the plan, which has to be strategically aligned with the organizational objectives. Then how he have to manage the resources. In terms of resources, could be of human resources, financial resources, or technical capabilities. Then communication with the management within the team, and the last one is about the quality, how he will ensure and enhance the quality. So the quality assurance part, basically the guidelines and everything is being covered under this domain. The last domain is about performing the internal audit. It basically covers the engagement lifecycle for an internal auditor. So it is being applicable from the most junior to the head of internal audit. It covers all the basics and the operational activities of an internal auditor. It has three principles. The first one is about the engagement planning. The second one is about how to conduct an internal audit engagement. And the third one is about communicating the results and monitoring the action plans, which is basically the reporting and the follow-up of the issued internal audit findings. So this domain is very much important for all the internal auditors, and especially the one which perform day-to-day internal audit engagements. So this is the one where you have to direct if you have internal audit teams. So this is something they have to be very much aware of, this domain. This is another presentation for your understanding that how these standards are being structured and organized. So if you look at the first domain, purpose of internal audit, govern everything which is being covered in ethics. Domain 2, governance. In domain 3, managing the internal audit function. Domain 4, and performing the internal audit services. So the purpose is the core, and then we have to demonstrate the ethical values. So these are the characteristic or attributes that internal audit has to embed in their personality. And then we have governing the internal audit function, which has more to do with the chief audit executive and the board and the audit committee. Then we have domain 4, which is managing the internal audit function. Again, this is more relevant to the chief audit executive. And then we have the last one, which is performing the internal audit services. Basically it covers the operational details of how an internal audit plan their engagement to final communication and the follow-up, which could mainly be reviewed or being referred by all the internal auditor within the internal audit function. There are certain FAQs related to the new standards, and I would give you some brief insight in terms of the new standard, when it will be ineffective, the exams, and some other matters which might be of more concern, especially for those students who are planning to register for the CIE exams, or those who are already registered, that how their exams would transition from old syllabus to the new one. So these are some of the frequently asked questions which I'm here to address, which is, when is the effective date for the new standards? The effective date is 9th January 2025, which is currently I'm recording this video in 2024, so which means that a year down from now. It is the new standards are already available on the website, which was released on 9th January 2024. The second question is all IPPF redundant? Not yet. In 2024 it will be redundant post the enactment of the new internal audit standard next year. What about the quality assurance on the internal audit standards? So basically, if if your department needs to carry out an external independent quality assurance as per the previous IPPF requirement, then in 2024 you can opt for to ensure the compliance with the current, which is 2024, or the previous 2017 standards compliance assurance. However, if it is due in 2025, then you can have a check on the readiness of the readiness of the new standards, that how effectively you are there close to bridge the gap from between the previous one and the new one, that you can do. Or I believe you still have the option in 2025 to go with the 2024, but that would be the last year. I'm not so sure about it. You have to check on the IIA website, but this is as per my understanding. Question number 4 is about the CIA exam material based on the new standard will be available from it. So all the CIA related exam material will be available not earlier than March 2025. So currently there is no books available, no MCQs available, so that will be available post March 2025. The first exam session based on the new Global Internal Audit Standards will be conducted post May 2025. Before that, since there is no books available, there is no resources available, so it's very unlikely that there would be any scheduled exam on the new standards. So if you still have time, you can appear in the previous one. And you have time till May 2025 to opt the old version. Question number 6 is all CIA exam standards students pathways. So if you are already in the CIA exam pathway, which means that you have passed part 1, you are preparing for part 2, so there will be most likely a transition period in which you will be given a buffer time where you can appear in the old version, or if you choose to appear in the new version as you like, but post that grace period most likely you would not have any option to appear in the old version, but that would happen somewhere post May 2025. Mapping of the old standards and the new standards, it is I believe available on the IIA website, so you can refer there, so you can have a clear view of what are the things that has changed. The eighth question is about the model charters. So in the previous standards, if you remember, there was a model charter for the audit committee charter and the internal audit charter. So these two model charters were being provided as a reference to the internal auditors. So currently on the new Global Internal Audit Standards, these charters are not being provided as a draft or as a template for us to refer back to. So sometime soon it will being presented by the IIA, but for that you have to refer back to the IIA website. Thank you very much for watching this brief intro about the Global Internal Audit Standards. I believe that it will help you, and if you are interested in the CIA exams and you are still preparing for the CIA exam, I have complete series for all part 1, part 2 and part 3 available on my YouTube channel by the name of Stuployer. So you can go there and you can have complete lecture, except for the part 3, which still has some remaining units to be covered. However, 70% of the syllabus has been covered for part 3. Till next time, wish you good luck and remember me in your prayers. Thank you.